Today we're going to be talking about Chapter 7 and looking at some different types of traits, different multifactorial or different polygenic traits. So we're going to begin here with some terms. First, we're just going to review that a Mendelian trait would be those that we talked about in our very first unit. These are traits that are caused by a single gene. Compare these to polygenic traits. We introduced these in our last lap. These are traits that are caused by more than one gene. So a trait would either be Mendelian or polygenic. A new term that we're going to be adding this chapter is multifactorial. A multifactorial trait is also influenced by the environment. So we're looking at a trait that has a genetic component and an environmental component. Multifactorial traits can be Mendelian, caused by one gene and the environment, or a multifactorial trait can be polygenic. That means it's caused by more than one gene and also the environment. Sometimes we use the term complex traits to refer to these multifactorial traits. Again, traits that have a genetic and an environmental component. Some examples of multifactorial traits would be things like height, skin color, eye color. Many different illnesses are multifactorial, as are many behavioral traits that we will be discussing in Chapter 8. When we are looking at multifactorial traits, an interesting feature is that sometimes they are caused by the additive result of several different genes. So this would be true of a trait that's polygenic. Several different genes are contributing to the trait. Additive means for every dominant allele, the trait would get stronger. Let's consider the example of multiple sclerosis. This is a disease that's sometimes called MS. There are 5 different genes that cause and contribute to multiple sclerosis. The more you have of these dominant genes, each one increases the risk for developing MS. So the effects of each of the genes add up. If you have only one, you would be less likely to develop the disease than if you had 5. This would also, though, be considered a multifactorial trait because not only are there several genes contributing to it, but there's also an environmental component. So this disease is triggered by some environmental aspect. So we have a polygenic trait with an additive effect, and we have a multifactorial trait because it's genes plus the environment. One thing to consider about polygenic traits is that when you are looking at the different traits, they tend to show a range. There's not just one or the other, there's a wide range of traits. A more precise term for this is we say that the traits continuously vary. It means that we have a combined action of many genes and they create a range or scale of phenotypic expression. Instead of just black and white, we have shades of gray. We have in-betweens. You can't be in height for humans tall or short. We have a wide range of tall, really tall, medium, medium short, short, and really short. Sometimes we use the term quantitative traits to refer to these that vary along this scale. Again, a Mendelian height in the plants was just short or tall. It was one or the other. This is not true with polygenic height that we see in humans. In humans, height can range anywhere from 4 feet to 7 feet and still be in the normal range. When we graph these things, we can put them into groups. Some people are tall, some people are short, but these are subgroups that still have a range. When we put these on a graph, the graph for these traits will almost always resemble a bell-shaped curve. Notice the extremes are very rare. Very, very short people, very, very tall people are rare. The mid or medium traits tend to be the most common. People who are medium tall are the most common. One time in my class, we went through and we counted up numbers of people at different heights. And we found that the shortest person in our class was 5'1", and we only had 2 of those people. The tallest person in our class was 6'1". We only had 1 of that person. But when we were in the middle ranges, 5'6" had 9 people. 5'7" had 8 people. We saw much higher numbers for the medium range traits. Again, it would give us that bell-shaped curve. We're now going to look at several different traits that are either polygenic or multifactorial or both. We're going to start with fingerprint patterns. Fingerprint patterns are the ridges in the skin on your fingerprints. And these are ridges in what we call your dermal layer of your skin. And we see things like loops, whorls, arches, different shapes in our fingerprint pattern. Fingerprint patterns are polygenic, meaning they're caused by more than one gene, and multifactorial. They have an environmental component. And you may not have really realized that. They are polygenic because there are many genes that control them, and multifactorial because you can do things to your fingers to alter the fingerprint. In fact, in utero, if the baby, while it is still developing, touches the walls of the amniotic sac or another part of the body, they can smudge or change their fingerprints. This graph that's in your book shows a very rough bell-shaped curve for number of ridges in fingerprints. Notice the medium numbers have the highest amounts and the extremes, 50 ridges or 270 ridges, are the lowest amounts. This gives us a rough bell-shaped curve, which tells us we are likely to have a polygenic trait. Polygenic traits often vary continuously, they have a range, and they are graphed with a bell-shaped curve. Height is another example. Height is polygenic and it has an environmental component. Okay. Here are some graphs made with actual people lined up by their heights, and it shows the medium heights are the most common, and we actually get a bell-shaped curve in these graphs as well. These two pictures are kind of interesting. The top picture is from 1920 and the bottom picture is from 1997. Notice the changes in people's height. In 1920, the tallest individual on that graph was only 5'9". In 1997, the tallest person in this particular group of students was 6'5". So it's kind of interesting that the environmental changes over that 75-year span did cause a change in heights. Polygenic, more than one gene, we see that in the bell-shaped curve, and environmental component. There's definitely a component to the environment that affects height. Another trait we're going to look at today is eye color. This one is polygenic, but only polygenic. This is not a multifactorial trait. It is entirely influenced by genes. There is no environmental impact that affects your eye color. And I think that would make sense to you. Nothing you eat would change your eye color. No amount of exercise would change your eye color. Eye color is pure polygenic. More than one gene, but no environmental impact. Keep in mind that when we're talking about eye color, typically we just say blue, brown, green, maybe hazel if we're being pretty specific, but there are wide ranges between these. People have things like flecks in their eyes and different specks of color, and there's kind of like a light blue or a dark blue or a light brown or a dark brown. So there are all kinds of ranges in between these colors. First of all, there are two genes that code for the bluish-greenish colors, and that's due to a pigment called lipochromes, and then there are other genes that code for the brown colors, and those are due to pigments called melanins. There is a hierarchy of dominance here. Brown is the most dominant color. Brown is always dominant to everything else. The next color would be green. Green is dominant to blue, but not dominant to brown. And then blue is recessive to everything. So our dominance hierarchy, brown is recessive to everything, brown is dominant to everything. Brown is dominant over green. Brown is dominant over blue. Green is dominant over blue, and blue is recessive to everything. Here is a chart that's in your book that does kind of simplify eye color, and they've kind of taken the green out of this altogether. And we've just looked at kind of blue and brown, and so we're only looking at two different genes here just to get a kind of simple view of it. Notice that we have an additive effect here. Every dominant allele makes our eye color darker. If we have all recessive alleles, little a, little b, we have the lightest blue eyes. And then if we have all dominant alleles, big A, big B, we have the darkest brown. So this is just a simplified way to see multiple alleles affecting eye color. Again, it is additive. The more dominant alleles you have, the darker the eye color. Notice there are several different ways to get the medium colors of eyes. Because you can have two dominant alleles, it can be any two that are dominant. So there's a lot of variety there, and you'll be doing some problem solving with this in your homework. Notice we do have a bell-shaped curve here. The most extreme cases, the lightest blue and the darkest brown, have only one possible genotype, and they tend to be then less common. So we do see a bell-shaped curve. Skin color works in a similar way to eye color. Figure 7.4 in your book does also oversimplify skin color, so we can kind of study it. And they're looking at it with only 3 genes in consideration. In your lab, you'll do an example with only 2 genes for skin color. But we're trying to just simplify it so we can understand essentially what's going on. Skin color is also additive. The more dominant alleles you have, the darker your skin color. Again, it is an additive effect. So here's an example of the bell-shaped curve showing us the number of different genotypes for skin color based on 3 genes, A, B, and C. If you have 3 dominant alleles, you'd be right in the middle, and so that'd be kind of like a medium brown color. Notice all recessive alleles would be the lightest color, and all dominant alleles would be the darkest color. Again, it's additive, it's polygenic. Skin color does have the extra consideration of also being multifactorial. It has a environmental component. I think you can probably understand too, like how nutrition might play a role in height. It would be multifactorial as well. So skin color has an environmental component, also several genes, so polygenic and multifactorial.